Here you see me absolutely annihilating bosses in mere seconds by just throwing a couple of pots at them. And no, I'm not really over-leveled. In fact, this character is probably only around level 50 or 60. I have just spent some time learning how to make use of some of the most slept-on items in the game. Move aside weapons, you are trash. Consumables is where it's at. And if you would like to learn how to be this powerful and incorporate some of the most amazing items in the game into your build, stay tuned and I will teach you how to do exactly that. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are and whatever you're doing. I hope you're having a fantastic day. As you just saw in the intro, consumables are the new Rivers of Blood. They are the new Sword of Night and Flame. They are the new Blasphemous Blade. Consumables are so much more powerful than weapons. And with the right build and in the right hands, they can take your build and elevate it to never before imagined heights. So in this video, I'm going to call out for you the best consumables in the game, the best build and buffs to pair with these consumables, and how you can use them to absolutely devastate everything in this game. What gave me the idea for this video is I have decided to do a consumable only run over on Twitch, because I have rarely touched consumables in this game, and I wanted a way to force myself into it. And I now want to bring that knowledge to you and help you to incorporate some of the most powerful consumables in the game into your build. There are so many incredible consumables, so I've tried to narrow this down to my top dozen or so to help cover you for all situations and all types of enemies. So let's get stuck in and start talking about them all. We'll check out the item crafting screen first, and I'll just go down the list in chronological order. And once we've checked out everything we can craft, we'll then move on to purchasable consumables such as daggers, with one particular type of dagger arguably being the most powerful thing in the entire game. So stay tuned and we'll talk about them in just a minute. For now, let's start off right at the top here with red main fire pots and volcano pots. These are, of course, amazingly powerful against enemies that are weak to fire. Volcano pots are actually just great against every single enemy in the game, provided that they're not immune to fire, because every single one will do 10 individual damage ticks, which will always add up for an insane amount of damage. And they can be paired with red main fire pots for even more big burst damage, because they both use a different type of pot. Cracked pots for the volcano and ritual pots for the red main fire, meaning you can ready so many of these before each fight. The recipe for the volcano pots can be bought from the Nomadic Merchant at Mount Gelmir. It is the Nomadic Warriors Cookbook 20. And the red main fire pots are in the Armourer's Cookbook 4, which is at Redmane Castle in the Western Gatehouse, which is just behind the two Lion Guardians. And to craft these items, let's start off with the volcano pots, because they are literally the easiest thing in the entire game to craft, and because of this, you will be using them a lot. They literally only require 2 volcanic stones to craft, and they can be found in so many different areas. One great farm is the Seethwater Terminus, but I actually prefer the Seethwater River. If you literally just do this loop here, you can grab yourself around 20 to 30 volcanic stones and a couple of mushrooms along the way as well. Rest and repeat, and you'll be able to craft a full stock of 20 volcano pots in no time at all. Now let's talk about the red main fire pots, which are a bit more of a ball ache, and one ingredient is somewhat limited. For the mushroom farm, I love coming here to the Scenic Isle in Liurnia, because you can grab 1 or 2 mushrooms depending on your luck right here. But as I say, you can also grab mushrooms at the volcanic stone spot that we just visited, so you could always grab them there as well. Next up, for the smoldering butterflies, the farm spot that I advise is the War Master's Shack, and you just want to head northeast, and there are 8 butterflies you can grab just here. Super quick and easy, and it will net you absolutely loads of them. And finally, the tricky ingredient, and why you want to really rely on volcano pots rather than red main fire pots, is old fangs. These do have a 100% drop chance from Lion Guardians and a 5% drop chance from some Misbegottens, so they are very hard to farm. However, there are certain areas in the game where you can grab loads of them. There is 5 at the Caria Manor just above Pidia. You can buy another 3 from Pidia. You've also got 5 more in the Gowl Cave. So you can loot a fair few old fangs from just around, but just keep in mind that red main fire pots are one of the most limited items on this list, so you want to use these sparingly and keep them for big intimidating enemies if you want to use them at all. But as I say, volcano pots pots are amazing and will be a staple of your consumable build. Next up on the list, let's take a look at poison and rot. Firstly, let's talk about your two different options for poison, and they are, of course, poison pots and fetid pots, respectively. Poison pots require the Nomadic Warriors Cookbook 14, and this is found at the Smoldering Church, where you are first invaded by Anastasia. And fetid pots require the Nomadic Warriors Cookbook 4, which is in the south of the Mistwood, right by the rune bear that's clawing the tree near the map fragment. Arguably, you always want to go with fetid pots because they deal so much more build up and the materials are easier to farm as well. But if you're not careful, fetid pots will also inflict yourself with poison, so that's the argument for using poison pots instead. Also, the major difference between poison pots and fetid pots that I should let you know in case you don't know, fetid pots deal deadly poison. And over the whole time span of the poison, deadly poison actually deals 1/3 less damage. However, it inflicts its damage twice as fast. But if you're playing the long game and you want to get the maximum amount of damage output, albeit much slower, then you should favour poison pots. I would just like to mention, I appreciate that this is a lot of information, where to find all the cookbooks, where to find all the ingredients, so I'm going to try and blitz through this as quick as possible for you to keep the video nice and concise, so obviously just pause it wherever you need to, so that it doesn't become too much of an information overload. So let's quickly take a look at the ingredients that both require. Poison pots require toxic mushrooms firstly, and the best place to grab these is at the Church of the Plague in Caelid. If you just do a loop around the church, you can grab 2 lots of toxic mushrooms along with a few faded Erdleaf flowers. You'll be needing these for another item later. There's also a couple of Aeonian butterflies that we'll also be needing, but do remember that Aeonian butterflies do not respawn, so they are very crucial and you want to use them sparingly. Poison pots also require poison bloom, and there is an absolute ton of poison bloom at Jarberg, along with a lot of other flowers, most of which we will also need, so grab them all whilst you're here. And next, for the fetid pots, we've already covered the mushrooms that you need for them. And finally, you need gold-tinged excrement, and you can find a load of that just north of the Artist's Shack in Limgrave, just here. Obviously, these pots are only going to be good against enemies that are weak against poison, and fetid pots particularly are so powerful that at high arcane scaling, you can inflict most enemies with just 1 pot. And finally, to coincide with them, because poison and rot can be applied at the same time, we want to go and also grab rot pots. For these, you need the Nomadic Warriors Cookbook 22, which is found in a chest in the western ruins of the Lake of Rot. Again, they need the toxic mushrooms and the faded Erdleaf flower, which you can grab from the Church of the Plague, and then they are also going to need Aeonian butterflies. These are a very limited item. Technically, you can farm them from basilisks, but they have a very low drop chance. Basically, you just want to go anywhere where there is rot, and you should find a lot of them around the Aeonian Lake in central Caelid. And you can also get a huge clump of them down here in the south of the Lake of Rot, and a lot more just scattered around the Lake of Rot itself. So use the rot pots much more sparingly. But another thing that's fantastic about these is, like the Redmane fire pots, they use ritual pots to craft, so you can use these alongside your poison pots and your volcano pots without having to use up your stack of cracked pots. Also, Jesus Christ, I'm going to be using the word pot quite a lot in this video. We should have a pot counter on screen. Take a shot every time I say pot. No, don't. You will die. Do not do that. You will actually die. Next up, we've got everyone's favorite, the sleep pots. You get these super early on in the game. They're crafted using the Ferber's Cookbook 1, which is found at this gravesite in Limgrave. And all they need is mushrooms, which we've already covered extensively, and Trina's lilies. Trina's lilies are another limited item. The item description does say exceedingly rare. They're really not. They are quite common. Throughout a playthrough, you can get more than 100 of them. There's a few fantastic farming spots. There's 11 in the village of the Albanorics. And as you can see, there's a total of 5 just here, just north of the Boil Prawn Shack. Trina's lilies you'll find pretty much anywhere you go in the world. Just make sure you're always keeping an eye out for them to keep up your stock of sleep pots. Sleep pots are absolutely amazing and can trivialize bosses such as the Godskin duo, allowing you to defeat this boss without taking any damage if you are very good at using them. Next up, we'll come on to the final 2 pots of the list. Then we'll move on to a few of the other more exciting consumables. So that we've got most damage types covered, now we're going to look at lightning and holy pots. For lightning pots, you need the Ancient Dragon Apostles Cookbook 2, and this is purchased from the merchant next to the forest-spanning Great Bridge right in the center of the Altus Plateau. And holy water pots you can get right at the beginning of the game as you purchase the cookbook for them from Kale. Both of them again require mushrooms. Holy pots require the tarnished golden sunflowers, which again you can get plentiful amounts of in Jarburg. And to round off the ingredients for all of the pots, the lightning pots require Fulgur Bloom. There's a few great locations to farm Fulgur Bloom, but my favourite, and I believe the quickest, is just to run south of the War Master's shack in between the two beacons that I've placed here. Make sure you're careful as you jump down onto these ruins, and you can jump down once again. You'll see this little lightning storm, and you'll be able to grab around 20 Fulgur Bloom. That is everything you need to make some of the most powerful pots in the game. I'm sure there are more I haven't mentioned, such as the magic pots, for instance, which could be great in certain situations, but these are the most common ones I have used to carry me through the consumables only run. Do with them as you will, mix them into your build, and they can turn any of your already powerful builds into absolute devastating powerhouses. Now let's have a look at aromatics and daggers and a few other awesome consumables. When we're talking about aromatics, in my opinion, the two best aromatics in the game both come from the same Perfumer's Cookbook. That is Perfumer's Cookbook 1, found here in the Perfumer's Ruins. We are of course talking about the Spark Aromatic and the Uplifting Aromatic. Both very different. The only one of the two I've been using consistently in my consumables only run is the Spark Aromatic, which scatters a wide arc of sparks that will then explode, dealing loads of fire damage to all enemies caught in the blast. If you're close enough to enemies, this actually has 2 hitboxes. It will hit enemies twice. And with the right buffs, which we'll be talking about later, this can do devastating amounts of damage. I am talking 2,000 to 3,000 damage per hit. The Spark Aromatic is truly amazing, and for the ingredients required, you can get an absolute ton of Altus Bloom in the same place that you just grabbed the recipe. There is so much of it in the Perfumer's Ruins. The other ingredient that's a bit more awkward is the Miranda powder. You can grab 10 in Lane Dell, very near the East Capital Rampart site of Grace actually, and another 6 in the Perfumer's Grotto. Apart from that, the best place to farm it is by killing giant Miranda sprouts. So I recommend going to the Morn Tunnel site of Grace in the Weeping Peninsula, heading back up out the lift, and farming the 4 giant Miranda sprouts just here. The tiny Miranda sprouts have a tiny little percentage chance to also drop Miranda powder, but the giant ones will drop it 100% of the time. So that's a great way to farm it if you're planning on using a lot of the Spark Aromatic. The Uplifting Aromatic is a fantastic one that I need to use more and I have still been sleeping on. It will boost your physical damage by 10% for 40 seconds and also practically nullify all damage for the next hit, basically making you invincible for one attack. This is a bit harder. It requires the Altus Bloom that we've already talked about and a few more very niche ingredients. The Silver Tear Husks you can find loads of in Nokron. It will respawn infinitely. Then you've got the Budding Cave Moss, which is very plentiful in the locations you find it, but can be surprisingly rare. Perfumers do have a chance to drop this, but the best place to farm it, if you have this site of Grace, is to go to the Abductor Virgin site of Grace at Mount Gelmir, run from the boss room back to the cave that you dropped into before fighting the boss, and in here will be 13 Budding Cave Moss. Don't worry though, if you haven't been here and haven't beaten the Abductor Virgins yet, you can run down from the Subterranean Inquisition Chamber site of Grace instead. That's a mouthful, isn't it, that one? And the final item needed is Arteria Leaf, which are another fairly limited item. There is a small chance to have them drop from snow troll enemies in the mountaintops of the giants, and 5 can be purchased from the isolated merchant at the bottom of the Weeping Peninsula. But apart from that, you will just find a few of them scattered around the world, so just make sure you keep your eyes peeled for the Arteria Leaves because they are quite rare. So because of that, you want to make sure you're using the Uplifting Aromatic sparingly and only when you really need to. Now let's take a look at the best dagger options available to us. And at the end, we'll go through the accompanying buffs, armor sets, talismans, physics, all of that stuff that's going to help you put all of this together and deal maximum damage. Firstly, I'll just address that you can buy poison bone darts and other poison related items infinitely from this merchant here in Caelid, but I don't advise it. Poison pots and fetid pots are way better for poisoning enemies. The main reason we're using darts and daggers is to inflict lots of damage, and there are much better ways to do that. The cheapest and quickest way to do this is by purchasing throwing daggers from Kale. You can do this right at the start of the game. They're super cheap, they're very fast, and with high levels of dexterity, they're quite powerful as well. However, before long, you'll find yourself in the Weeping Peninsula. And in almost every situation, you want to switch out throwing daggers for cookery. They can be purchased infinitely from the merchant right next to the Castlemorn Rampart site of Grace. They have near infinite range with absolutely no drop-off. They do crazy amounts of damage, and they have massive bleed build-up. So though they are very slow and it's hard to use them up close, they're great for dealing with most enemies and keeping your distance. Next up, and even better than these, we have got the fan daggers. You can buy these in limited supply from Patches initially, but as long as you progress his questline, when you unlock Volcano Manor, he will move there and you can purchase them infinitely. So make sure you speak to him in Limgrave, and obviously don't kill him, and then when you get to Volcano Manor, he will teleport there and you can buy them to your heart's content. They have the most DPS out of any consumable in the game. You just need to make sure you're up close and personal so that every single dagger is connecting. And it is using these that I was able to deal around 20,000 damage to the fire giant in just 10 seconds and immediately put him on phase 2. They are truly devastating and very, very underutilized. Before we move on to the next dagger, I nearly forgot to talk about glintstones so that you have that magic damage in your arsenal as well. You can very early and very easily pick up the Glintstone Craftsman's Cookbook 1 so that you can make cuckoo glintstones. That is here just northwest of the Church of Irith. However, they require you to farm crystal buds, which can be a little bit awkward to farm, and also cracked crystals, which we ideally want to use for a different item. So, what I advise you do is go and grab the Smithing Bell-Bearing 1. This is dropped by the Crystallian boss at the end of the Raya Lucaria Crystal Tunnel, and this will allow you to infinitely purchase glintstone scraps. They are arguably better, they are infinite, they don't waste your resources, they're very cheap. So for the magic damage for this build, obviously you've got magic pots, but these glintstone scraps are amazing. And for another dart that I very nearly forgot about, as I'm talking about the cracked crystals, we have got the crystal darts. To craft crystal darts, you need the Nomadic Warriors Cookbook 11, which is purchased from this nomadic merchant in Liurnia of the Lakes, and they literally just require cracked crystals to craft. They are great for dealing with construct enemies such as golems, imps, and watchdogs, because with a certain amount, you will effectively mind control the enemy and they will start fighting on your behalf. And a great place to farm the cracked crystals is in the Celia Crystal Tunnel in Caelid. Obviously, you can walk there the old-fashioned way, or you can just deliberately get yourself teleported there by the teleporter trap chest in Lake Agheel, just here in the Dragonburnt Ruins. And finally, for all of the different consumables that I advise you use, we're now going to talk about gravity fans and gravity chunks. They can be purchased infinitely once you give the gravity bell bearing to the Twin Maiden husks, and this drops from the bell bearing hunter in Caelid. I know, he's really tough, but did you know you can very easily cheese him if you're happy to cheese an enemy? All you need to do is jump onto these rooftops on Torrent and start throwing stuff at him. If he does happen to get stuck beneath you and you can't target him, just jump to the other roof and repeat. When you then hand that bell bearing into the Twin Maiden husks, you can buy the fans for groups of enemies and the chunks for single target. Both are amazing against enemies that are weak to gravity, such as Radahn and the Crystallians. Now let's take a look at how you can put your build together to get maximum damage out of all of these consumables. To kick off the start of this last section, let's have a look at some of the buffs that you can incorporate to help you make the most of consumables as you incorporate them into your build. The most obvious one, and a spell that everyone probably already uses, Golden Vow, is going to be absolutely amazing, and it's found right here just northeast of the War Master's shack. Next up, we'll move over to Caelid, and we are just going to go south of the Fort Gale North site of Grace, and just behind Fort Gale, just here, in between two fire cannons, is the Flame Grant Me Strength incantation. Obviously, you'll need to apply Golden Vow to a weapon as an Ash of War, and you'll need a seal to be able to use this incantation, but any will do. Next up, come over here to Western Liurnia, and just around here, surrounded by jellyfish, you will find the Jellyfish Shield, so that you can use that incredibly powerful Ash of War, Contagious Fury. Next, let's have a look at some of the best crystal tiers to use. For the most part, fan daggers are going to be your best friend, so the Strength Knot Crystal tier and the Dexterity Knot Crystal tier combined will make fan daggers do even more damage. But some other great options to swap out to, if you are primarily using pots of a particular element, will be the Magic, Flame, Lightning, and Holy Shrouding cracked tiers. A combination of one of these with the corresponding knot tier, such as Dex, Strength, Faith, or Intellect, will make sure your pots are dealing the most amount of damage. Next up, we've got Talismans. and these are very interchangeable depending on your specific build. At the moment, I have got very few, so I've got a bit of a mishmash. But let me give you a bunch of different examples so that you can tailor them to your build. I love Radagon's Source Seal, especially for the early game, because as long as you're not planning on getting hit much, it's just a great damage boost. Other fantastic options are the Radagon Icon, so that you can set up your buffs quicker at the start of fights. Of course, the Perfumer's Talisman if you're planning on using lots of aromatics. And then, as you can see here, I like to use the Ritual Sword Talisman for an extra 10% attack power and maximum health, and the Arsenal Charm so that I can wear a big tanky armor set for more survivability. Other talismans that I don't have that I would recommend, the Companion Jar reward at the end of Alex and Jarben's questline is amazing because it will raise the potency of throwing pots by 20%. You could also opt for a lot more offense over defense, unequip all your gear and use something like the Blue Dancer Talisman, and you could even double down in the stats and use something like Marika's Source Seal if you're very confident in your abilities. The possibilities of talismans depending on the build that you're using and incorporating this into really are endless, so just have fun with it. And finally, the one piece of gear I'm going to advise is the jar head, because again it will increase the power of throwing pot items, synergizing great with the Companion Jar Talisman. And that is how you can melt every single boss in the game with a plethora of very fun, very unique and very underutilized items. I hope this makes your next playthrough so much fun. It's been a pleasure making this for you. And as always, all I have left to say is thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.